Hi, everybody. I'm back with one of my favourite people, Dennis Richards, a doctor of chiropractic, a Palmer graduate. So he's a fellow alma mater, and not everyone will be a Palmer graduate on this podcast, but Palmer was the first and the most illustrious and the most influential college worldwide. And my initial mentors and influences were Palmer graduates. 90% of them. And Dennis and I met a long time ago. And I'll start by interjecting a story of, hey, Dennis, do you remember when you visited me in Davenport as a young student? The suspension on my Mazda 626.
No, I don't remember it. There wasn't any suspension.
There wasn't any to speak of.
There was a suspension, but no shock absorbers.
And Dennis stayed with me when I was
like driving a big bowl of jelly.
Although over there we say Jello, right?
We do.
I just got a WhatsApp interference there. Dennis, it was an interesting time in chiropractic because you'd already been in practice for some years. Therefore, you've just finished your PhD, which is a remarkable achievement because the fact that there's probably no PhD in existence, you tell me, that mentions the word vitalism. Is there?
There may be one by a French chiropractor a long time ago.
Wow.
There may be two, actually. There are two French chiropractors who did PhDs, but they were published in French. One of them then published a book. I would have known 3 years ago, I can't remember now whether or not he mentioned vitalism. Vitalism's a thing that people talk about in chiropractic, but it's not really written down. It's what we call hidden knowledge. It's intuitive knowledge, and that's why I did the PhD, to find out what they were talking about.
And I think that it's a great achievement for that reason, because a PhD should be groundbreaking, and you've broken ground. But basically, going back to when I was hanging out with you in Davenport, how do you think the profession's changed? Has it?
I think it has, Joe. I think that, and I used to have a lot of involvement in the profession and exposure in the profession. And what I believed was that chiropractic has a beating heart. It's normal chiropractors like you and like me. And on top of that is a small group of people, chiropractors, who are not in tune and not congruent with the majority of the profession. They are people involved in education, in politics, and they want to change the profession into something else. And I've seen a lot of that, and it's happening now. It's always happened. It's fairly strong at the moment, but when you go under the surface, there's a beating heart of traditional chiropractic, and that came out in
anything with a beating heart grows and develops on its own. So it's implied by what you say that if someone's coming in an undercurrent of trying to change, that's an act of will, and it's usually has sinister motivations. Would you agree? I mean, for what reason?
I don't know if it's sinister. It might be in the way of a few people. I think this happens in several ways. The people in chiropractic politics, this is just my opinion, who try to change the profession from its traditions to something else, basically where they try to change it to where chiropractic is a procedure, not a system. Chiropractic is manipulation for the treatment of pain. That's their belief. And I think those people, by and large, believe that if we were to give up all that weird stuff, you know, the beating heart stuff, that we would be accepted by significant others, such as bureaucrats and politicians.
That's power.
That's one viewpoint, one group. The other group is a substantial group of academics within the profession who, as they work in institutions that aren't solely chiropractic institutions, they work in big universities. And so the chiropractic department is a tiny fish in a giant pond. And the dean of the faculty or whatever that chiropractic is part of is not a chiropractor. That person is a physicist or a medical doctor or who knows what. Whatever. That person is a professional academic administrator. Their interest in chiropractic is that lots of students come and pay lots of fees, and we don't have too much trouble. And so I believe, and I can quote some research on this, I believe that what happens there is that oftentimes the chiropractors who go into those situations, it's not in their interest to stand up for chiropractic. It's their interest to be part of the machine that is the university. If they want to keep their job, if they want to advance within the university system, they have to play the game by the university culture.
Wow. This is a central theme that's coming into, I've only started this podcast, and again, this centralized power instead of, as Jack Kruse calls it, a decentralized nature. He says nature is decentralized. It's a natural order of things. You're describing something central so that there's compliance, which maintains a stream of income, which is power, but breeds mediocrity, perhaps. Or does it breed excellence? I don't know.
It's meant to breed excellence.
Right.
Whether it does or not is another thing.
Is the question.
Because universities are interesting places. I just spent 5 years in one, by distance mainly. But
you kept your distance. That's a good one.
No, I didn't. I was overseas for some of the I live very close to the university.
It's a great uni by the sound of it. Southern Cross?
Southern Cross University, yes.
And so we give them a plug. They are backing several chiropractic PhDs, which are marvelous in their topics, right?
Well, we have 2 completions.
Yep.
We started 5.5 years ago. We have 2 completions, myself and my good friend, Dr. Donald McDowall from Canberra.
Yeah, I want to drag him on here soon.
Who has produced the most astonishing thesis about D.D. Palmer and the influences on D.D. Palmer. And he particularly looked at what D.D. Palmer said was the fundamental principle of chiropractic, which is tone.
Tone.
Now, 98% of chiropractors have never heard that. They don't know that. And the 2% that have heard it don't know what tone is.
And the fascinating thing is that it is written down, isn't it? Unlike your, you said that vitalism was like a hidden undercurrent. Tone was actually in the textbooks.
Well, vitalism was too. It was in D.D. Palmer's. I mainly worked off to understand the foundation of the profession. I mainly worked off D.D. Palmer's 1910 book.
Right.
Because he said before that chiropractic had not been evolved enough and he did not understand it well enough to write about it. He put out a journal every month, and his son took some of D.D. Palmer's writings and published in a book in 1906, but it wasn't until 1910 that D.D. actually said, I think I get it well enough to say what it is. And the book was called The Chiropractor's Adjuster, and he was adjusting what he considered to be the wrong thoughts and wrong ideas about chiropractic of other chiropractors who were writing about it. So, but he didn't mention the word vitalism, but he used vitalistic terms such as life force, life energy, vital intelligence, terms like that. These are vitalistic terms.
Yes.
But with tone, he wrote about tone a lot. But when he died in 1913, tone was basically abandoned by the profession at that time. And Donald McDowall's thesis is about that. It's fascinating. It's just, it's you know, these days everything is groundbreaking and innovative and all that stuff, but his thesis is there's nothing like it in the profession.
Well, I'm going to chuck you in there as well, Dennis. In my latest email blast, I put in the links to yours and his dissertation. But getting off that.
Can I just say one more thing? We have 2 completions, chiropractors completions at Southern Cross, and we have another 4 chiropractors completing, participating in working their way through their PhD studies at the moment. Yesterday we had we have 4. 4 other ones, 1 from Canada, 1 from the US, and 2 from Australia. And just yesterday, my good friend, Dr. Joel Alcantara from just near Vancouver, did his in Canada review, which is a report on the conclusion of his 2nd year. So Joel will be finished in a year and a half. And he has a wonderful, wonderful project going too.
He's done more for chiropractic pediatrics than anyone I know, aside from probably Jeannie Ohm, God rest her soul. But Joel is a humble and a very, I'm going to try, now you've reminded me, I want to get him on here as well.
Joel is the research director for the International Chiropractic Pediatric Association. Yeah. They have about 6,000 chiropractor members around the world. And he has a practice-based research network of about 800 chiropractors around the world. So he has free data basically anytime he likes.
So what do you see on the horizon, Dennis?
Can you be more specific?
Firstly, for yourself, you have an influential and amazing achievement on your hands. What is Dennis Richards going to do now? Because I know you've retired from practice, and I will say that I did a 2-week locum for you. It was my first gig in 1997. I came up to the Gold Coast and loved it. And you had one of the most streamlined practices I'd ever encountered, with beautiful levels of care, highly advanced radiology suites, at the time using probably the greatest amount of safety that I'd seen. Filtration. So, yeah, filtration. So now you're out of practice. What are you going to do?
Joe, you know, I'm speaking with you now on a MacBook Pro, and you probably are too. And you know, we've been fans of Apple for a long time.
You got me into Apple.
I'm sorry?
You got me into Apple.
Yes, I did, yes. And just each day I walk on the beach for about an hour, Currumbin Beach. Very nice. Had a swim yesterday. It's very nice up here. Water's 22 degrees.
Beautiful.
And I'm looking for, the PhD took a lot out of me. I was really tired at the end of it. I spent the final 8 months of the 5 years writing for 6 hours a day. And I would have my iPhone right next to me and with the stopwatch on. And I would write for 30 minutes and then have 10 minutes off. And I did that 7 days a week for 8 months, except I had 2 days off at one stage.
Wow.
And I was very tired at the end, so I've just been taking it easy since then. But I feel the need now to get my act together and do something. And so I've started rebuilding my mind. While I'm on my walks, I listen to motivational, inspirational podcasts. And just yesterday, by chance, I remembered the time Steve Jobs, who was the co-founder of Apple, gave the graduation ceremony at Stanford University. And anyone, you've probably seen that, anyone can watch it on YouTube.
Yeah.
And he said, he told his story, which was unbelievable.
Yes.
Perhaps you don't know the story. He was the child of two PhD. One was a PhD student, the other person held a PhD. And his mother didn't want him. And so she headed off and she went to California and put him up for adoption. And she stated that she only wanted her child to be adopted by very heavily educated people. And so a lawyer and his wife chose Steve Jobs. And then they decided they wanted a girl instead of a boy. So they bailed out. And so the adoption people found another couple and rang them up and said, would you take a boy? And they said, absolutely, right now. The problem is that the father, the new adoptive father, hadn't graduated from high school. He was a mechanic. And the mother had graduated from high school, but they had no university qualifications.
Wow.
When his biological mother found out about this, she refused to sign the adoption documents. She only did that several months later when they agreed that he would go to university. He did go to university, a place called Reed College. He dropped out after 6 months. He thought it was a waste of time. He was wasting his parents' money. And so what he did was he hung around for another 18 months, just going to classes he felt like doing. And he'd noticed around the university all sorts of beautiful signs, labels in beautiful hand-done calligraphy. And he found out that Reed College had the top calligraphy course in the United States. So he just went to it. And he was fascinated by calligraphy, what it meant, where it came from, the history, how you could make beautiful documents with it. And he had no idea why he was doing that. He was just drawn to it. So then years later, he found, and they started producing the Apple operating system. He put multiple fonts in it, whereas Microsoft only had one font. The little Apple computers had multiple fonts. They were scalable. They were justified, everything. So people figured out fairly quickly they could create beautiful documents on these funny little Apple computers, and you couldn't do it on a Microsoft computer. And so he said that when we look back in life, it's easy to connect the dots. He said, when you look forward, it's really hard to connect the dots. Why did he go to that calligraphy class? He was just attracted to it.
Yeah.
You know, I'm no Steve Jobs, but why did I do a PhD? One of my friends, one of my mentors talked me into it one morning, and I said, oh, okay. And so here we are 6 years later. And so I can look back and connect the dots. I find it really hard to look forward and connect the dots as to why I did a PhD and where it will take me. But Steve Jobs said, just have faith that one day you will be able to connect the dots. And so that's what's happening with me.
And I might say that at the time you said to me, look into the Apple Mac. And I said, well, okay. And it was the disruptor. It was the vibrance. It was different, think different. It was the one shaking stuff.
It has a beating heart, Joe.
Right.
Steve Jobs said it's the computer for the rest of us. Chiropractic is the system for preservation, for health for the rest of us.
So therefore, you've just made a future statement that the heart is still beating. There is hope.
Joe, you remember Dr. Strang, who taught us philosophy.
100%.
He said, if all the chiropractors in the world disappeared, chiropractic would still exist. It would exist as a platonic form. Even if it wasn't practice, it would still be in existence. And I think I've thought about this a lot, and I might investigate this actually. As I was doing my PhD, my principal supervisor, Dr. Elizabeth Emanuel, who's a nurse and midwife, a brilliant woman.
Yes.
One day she said, I was getting pretty tired and she was working me really hard. And she said, Dennis, I think you should look into hidden knowledge. And I said, what's that? She said, go away and find out. So I went away, I spent a week on it. And hidden knowledge is something the nurses talk about, where nurses are different from doctors.
Yes.
And what's different about them is that they both work in hospitals, but the doctor wanders in for his 10 o'clock grand rounds at about 12:15, says hi to everyone, looks at a couple of charts and scribbles and leaves. The nurse stays there for 8 hours shift. So there's a nurse there at 3 a.m. in the morning when some poor person is in the hospital in pain crying. It's the nurse who'll go and sit with them, not the doctor. So nurses bring something to that environment that doctors don't. That's a blunt statement, and it's not completely true in every case, but overall I think it is in general.
Yes.
And so when nurses always learnt by an apprenticeship system. They just went into the hospital and started emptying bedpans.
Yeah.
Okay. And they just wandered around and saw what was being done. And then probably 20, 25 years ago in Australia, their education was moved to the universities.
Yeah.
And so what happened was the nurses have always done what the doctor told them to do while the doctor was there. While the doctor was there, they nursed. They really took care of people. Okay. When nurses went through the university system, some of them wanted to get higher degrees, masters, PhDs, and become teachers, lecturers, researchers. To do that, they couldn't do it within the medical system. There was nothing in the nursing institutions for that. They couldn't go to a medical school and do it. So they went outside and they went into other areas of scholarship, such as education. And so they got their PhDs and their masters in education, so they could educate other nurses to a higher level. Then those people who had those PhDs then developed knowledge that was exclusive to nursing, nursing knowledge. So they went up a ladder, but all the way along, they were motivated by what nurses call hidden knowledge or tacit knowledge or unspoken knowledge. Okay, they know, a lot of nurses, when it's time to hold the patient's hand in the middle of the night. Okay, doctors don't do that by and large. And so nurses have this concept known as hidden knowledge, intuitive knowledge. And the reason why my supervisor told me to go away and study it and put it in my thesis, because she saw it was an explanation for, I was asking chiropractors, what do you mean when you speak about vitalism? What is this thing? What are you talking about? What do you mean? And she could see from my research data that was coming in and the way I was trying to interpret it, she could see that chiropractors have a hidden intuitive knowledge about vitalism in the form of innate intelligence.
Yes.
Okay. And so that's why she told me to include it. And I'm finished my PhD, but I'm an adjunct fellow at Southern Cross University now. And so I'm writing on material that came up during my PhD research, either data or concepts. I'm a concept guy, but my supervisors, my ex-supervisors keep wanting me to write about data. But chiropractors seem to have an intuitive knowledge. People, not everyone, a lot of people are attracted into chiropractic because they have an intuitive knowledge about innate intelligence, that healing comes from within, not from outside.
Wow. I would present to you a question now that, well, first, the assumption I think a lot of medical doctors do too, not a lot, but a lot of the authors that write books like, anyway, the more, say, spiritual side of medicine and energy medicine and whatever they call it. But what do you think is the relationship between this hidden knowledge and evidence-based medicine? Because on the surface, EBM is a good thing. It's going to make things legitimate and standardized, and the ego can no longer get in the way. How would you sum up? Is there a balance, or could never the twain meet?
So you're talking about medicine here, not chiropractic.
I would say that there's a
evidence-based medicine is part of chiropractic.
Yeah,
it's
in
part of
any
medicine.
field.
It's not part of chiropractic.
It's actually infiltrating every field. My best friend's an optometrist or a physio, and they
So
can
it's
do anything.
evidence-based practice, not evidence-based medicine.
Beg your pardon. Yes.
So I'm just clarifying there,
So
Joe. Sorry.
evidence-based.
Joe, you know how pedantic I am.
Well, it's like, listening to Dennis Richards tonight. There's like, Dennis, you wake up at 3 a.m. to take a pee. If you're sharing a room with him, he'll be talking about this stuff in his sleep, So this is like, no, not really. You're probably talking nonsense. But I mean, Dennis Richards, you should have your own podcast in front of a fireplace. And well, you're in a cathedral now. I don't know which it is. What is that?
Joe.
Italiano, sì, Roma.
Joe, you know where that is. San Pietro.
San Pietro.
But see the light. See the light that God's shining down on my head.
That's always.
That's Michelangelo's dome. So let me tell you a story. So this.
Do you have a comment to make about the interface between this hidden knowledge, this intuitive knowledge, and this evidence-based, well, pestilence, really?
It's not a pestilence, Joe, because my question is this. Before, I've been around for a while. Do you remember the mullet haircut?
Hang on. I had one in the 80s.
Not you, Warwick Kappa. They've come and gone. Things come and go all the time.
Sure.
Correct?
Yeah.
Things come and go.
Cyclic.
And evidence-based medicine and practice, it's already going because people are talking about evidence-informed practice and all this stuff. It's changing, and it changes because one is genuine people look for improvements all the time. But in the education and the academic industry, they have to be putting out new stuff all the time. They have to be putting bigger fins on the educational Cadillac because someone else will if you don't. So if you want to be known and get promoted and everything, you better be putting bigger fins on the Cadillac.
Yeah.
Okay. Otherwise, Toyota will. And so my question is this: before evidence-based practice came along, what was everyone doing? So what this is about is that when third parties became to pay more and more for medical treatment and chiropractic care in the States in the 80s, and chiropractors were getting $120 a visit guaranteed, for doing all this stuff they just made up.
There it is. Centralized control.
Lots of physiotherapy. Okay. The government, I have a newspaper article from the San Jose Mercury newspaper, probably from about 1980. And it reports on a congressional hearing where the congressman lined up all of these high-ranking medical persons and said, you're expecting the government to pay for all of this. how do we know we're getting our money's worth?
Right.
And the medical doctor said, so overnight they developed this thing called evidence-based practice.
Mm.
And so what it is that the claim that what they do is based on scientific evidence.
Yeah.
Now, if you believe that, can you see that bridge over your left shoulder? I own that and I have it for sale for a really good price. If you believe that medicine is based on scientific evidence. So I believe that what we have in chiropractic is we have 125 years of experience.
Mm.
Okay. And so we have, for example, Gonstead technique, which Clarence Gonstead developed over 50-something years.
Right.
By just, and every single person he saw was a trial of Gonstead technique.
Correct.
And so on what he observed, so it was empirical, he improved and developed that technique over the years.
Yeah.
Now, of course, he may have been biased. And so I believe that it's important that researchers examine what chiropractors do and find out what works and what doesn't work.
Mm.
But that's a whole other big subject, because researchers don't like to examine Gonstead technique as such, because they don't control it. They control what they teach in their institutions. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I believe we should be in chiropractic taking a holistic approach to research and studying what chiropractors actually do. And it's called pragmatic research. This is what chiropractors actually do. But that's difficult because chiropractors are very individual and do all kinds of different stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to, in one way, you just have to say, well, whatever they do, we will go into their offices and just research whatever they're doing. But otherwise, there are people who just do Gonstead and specialize in it. So you can study Gonstead technique and its effectiveness.
Mm.
So I believe that's important. But the other thing is that science, unfortunately, science is a Platonic ideal. It's this perfect concept. Science is a concept. The problem is it's done by human beings.
Mm.
Human beings aren't concepts, they're meat and bones. And they have minds, and they have all the strengths and weaknesses that human minds have.
Mm.
So what I'm saying too is that the results of research are often predetermined by what question is asked.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So you have to be very, very careful when you're studying what chiropractors do in chiropractic, what questions are asked. Because what most, I would say, chiropractic research does, science, classical science, is by nature reductionist. Are you with me?
Yes.
Okay. The world is such a big and complex place, you can't study all of it. So what you do is you pick one little thing, you extract it from
for our viewers, reductionist is
reductionism.
dismantling into a smaller portion of knowledge.
Well, you can't look at the whole universe, it's too big.
Gotcha.
So what reductionism does in essence is take one little part of the universe, it takes it out of the universe and puts it under a microscope.
Mm.
Or in a laboratory, or this or that.
And then quantum mechanics says that by the observation of that segment, you actually change it, right?
Well, let's not get too complicated. You're exactly right. That's current understanding. It's understanding of the last 75 years or more. But reductionism is artificial. Reductionism is if you want to see how a watch works, a watch is a machine, you pull it apart. Okay. And you nut out how it works. And reductionism works in a thing like a watch because it's a simple machine.
Yeah.
Human beings are infinitesimally more complicated than watches. They are physically, they are mentally, emotionally, spiritually. One is you put 7 billion of them together, all bets are off. And so most of the research that's done in chiropractic is reductionist, where they say, we will study one thing, we'll call it manipulation, because that's a mesh word, and so we can get published if we use the term manipulation rather than adjustment. And two, we will study it with one thing, pain, in one part of the body, the low back.
And there's that reduction.
Okay, and so you've reduced this whole thing that is chiropractic down to that.
Well,
and yet, chiropractors, you know, D.D. Palmer said that chiropractic was a science, a philosophy, and an art. Yes. Chiropractors are artists. What they do is they take your shirt off and lie down, face down. And that thing there, lying face down, that warm thing with those curves and things, that's their canvas they work on. And they're all different. They're all different. They're all artists are different. Chiropractors are all different. There's another clip you can get on YouTube from the movie. If you just put into YouTube, Jacob's Ladder, chiropractor. And it was a scene in a movie from 30 years ago where a chiropractor was working on the star of the film. And it's just so chiropractic.
Yes, I'll link it. It's Danny Aiello was the chiropractor.
Danny Aiello and Tim Robbins, is it?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you get out of practice or wondering what you're doing, I mean, it's not quite the way I practiced. It was very much the way I was taught to practice at Palmer to a large extent. But, you know, he's got the complicated table, you know, it looks like a high-low, I think, if I remember correctly. And it's just this intense, personal, emotional, spiritual and physical event. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's interesting. I only watched it a few months ago.
And if you look at on the ACA website, in the frequently asked questions, there's an answer that says something like, going to the chiropractor is just like seeing a physiotherapist or a medical doctor. No, it's not.
No, it isn't.
Have a look at that video from that movie and tell me where you've ever run into a medical doctor who does anything like that experience. It's completely different. You know, medical doctors don't touch you very often.
No.
Why would they touch you?
The hands.
Most chiropractors touch you all the time. That's what the word means. Touch, 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 touch.
Yep.
What was the question, Joe?
Well, I think this thing goes for 40 minutes, so we're almost at time.
Great.
We're going to have part 2. But I think, Dennis, you're coming back because you've got too much to say. So I can see that not only have you done a PhD, it really hasn't changed you, but I think it's enriched you. And I think you can enrich us further in the near future.
Thank you, Joe.
See you soon.
I'll look forward to it, Joe.